Let's talk about baseball here to end our conversation. Okay, so the CWS is over. LSU was a national champion. They beat Florida. And the final four teams, I think, were LSU, Florida, Tennessee, and TCU. Have the final rankings come out yet?
Oh, it was Wake and TCU.
Wake, TCU, Florida, and LSU. Who ended up being the number 2 team? Was it Wake Forest or Florida?
I'm not sure. It was one of those two. I thought Wake was the second best team in the country. I mean, they were outstanding. I can look here, but I don't know right offhand.
The other 4 teams that made the College World Series were Virginia, Tennessee, Oral Roberts, and Stanford. I can't remember all the 16 teams. Anyway, so here's my question. In every sport, I will do this thing, that I just call like tier theory, of like, here are the tiers of the sport. Here's what you have to do to break into a tier. Some tiers are very tight. Some are very loose. Men's college basketball is a loose tier. There is, there's a lot of bleeding between tiers.
Yeah,
we saw that in the national title game. Connecticut obviously is a blue blood. They've won, I think, 5 national titles in 25 years. But San Diego State's there, and they had no business being there if you're talking blue bloods. So tiers can easily bleed in men's college basketball for a variety of reasons we don't need to get into. In women's college basketball, they don't bleed much. Sometimes they bleed. Sometimes they bleed if there's a lot of blurring. I should say blurring is better than bleeding. Iowa makes it to the national title game, and kudos to Iowa for doing that. But Connecticut was banged up. Connecticut was missing its 2 best players who tore up their knees or whatever they did. They'll be back next year, and I guarantee you Connecticut will be in the final game. LSU's broken through, but a lot of that is because of Kim Mulkey. Now, I'm not trying to knock Angel Reese. She's a great basketball player. I don't know that Angel Reese is transferring from Maryland to LSU if Kim Mulkey isn't there.
Right.
And I don't think that, Anissa Morrow is transferring from DePaul to LSU and Haley Van Lith is transferring from Louisville to LSU if Kim Mulkey isn't there. So wherever Kim Mulkey is part of the top tier. The tier in women's college basketball is very small.
Yes.
It's probably 7 or 8 teams. And South Carolina's in there, and a few other teams are in there. So in men's baseball and softball, it's small too. In fact, there's one team, and then that's the one tier. Anyway, in college baseball, when you think about the tier that Nebraska might be on, what is it?
Well, so I would define the first tier as the teams that are always in the national hosting regionals discussion. And that's a good chunk of the SEC. That's Stanford. That's, 8 to 10 teams probably every year that's in that discussion. Yeah, Virginia's in there. Duke is sort of getting up into that tier. So you have a few in the ACC, a lot of the SEC, maybe another team here or there, Oklahoma State, although they always fall short. Oregon State, sure. So I think that's the group that's always there. They always have major league talent. They always reload. They're always in the postseason. The second tier to me is the teams that are tournament regulars. They're in there most of the time, but you don't see them make a ton of deep runs. And honestly, as much as you've kind of poo-pooed Oral Roberts a little bit, I would say Oral Roberts is in that second tier because they've been in the tournament like 21 of the last 25 years. Mm-hmm. They own their league. Whatever you want to say about the Summit League, they own it. They're always in. They haven't made that deep run. So to me, that's a 2-tier team that's made it. I would put Nebraska right now in the tier below that. I would put them in that 3rd tier.
So the second tier is big.
It is. Yeah, that's the middle class of your power, most of your power baseball conferences, your ACC, your SEC. That's the top of your smaller conferences, the Sun Belts and whatever else.
Coastal Carolina is in that tier.
Coastal Carolina would be in that tier, yep. But then the 3rd tier, I would say, is the one where the teams, they're invested. They make the tournament once every handful of years, but there always feels like there's a ceiling. I think that's kind of what Nebraska's been. They haven't been to a super regional since 2005. They haven't hosted since 2008, and so they're clearly invested in the sport, and their coaches work hard and they have good players. But if they were to make a super regional, that would be a big deal. Whereas I think if you're tier 1 or even tier 2, you make a super, it's like, okay, we're making a run here. People would lose their minds if Nebraska went back to a super regional.
Right.
I think that goes for
Before Dave Van Horn, they were like in tier 4 of tier 5.
That's right.
Like, we know we're not going to the tournament. We hope to have a winning record. We hope not to lose 35-14.
Mm-hmm. So, and that would be kind of the lower part of all these other power conferences. I always think of Kentucky as like a tier 3 team. They're the only SEC school that's never made the College World Series. Mm-hmm. They made a Super this year, so that was a step up for them. Kind of the middle to the bottom of the ACC, sort of maybe your second and third finishers in a lot of your other conferences. And I think that's where Nebraska is right now. I mean, the Big Ten is from a baseball perspective, it's a well-funded mid-major league. That's just what it is. And for all Nebraska's resources and fan support, they are still mostly in that top 4 range, but they're not winning it consistently. So I think that's where they are right now, is in that third tier that, you set up for a run every 3 or 4 years into the tournament. And, other than that, it just kind of feels like there's a ceiling on what you can do.
How do you get into the second tier if you're a program like Nebraska?
Well, I think...
I'm not talking about specific players.
Right.
I'm talking about...
Generally speaking.
General program dynamics. When you watch the College World Series, which you did for a fortnight, what are the program dynamics that you saw that are true among all those teams that would then be true of a team that's in Tier 2?
Right. Well, I think the support stuff, the ancillary things, Nebraska has a lot of that. Their attendance is top 25 consistently. They have that support. They draw like an SEC or an ACC school. Maybe not, an Arkansas that draws 8 or 9, but you look in these supers, Kentucky, Indiana State, those schools were happy and excited and breaking records that they had like 2,000 people in the stands. That's Nebraska on a Wednesday in mid-March against Northern Colorado. So they've got that. The NIL piece is interesting. I've heard recently from some folks in the know that like LSU's far and away, and from a baseball perspective, they're lapping the field with NIL money. SEC, most of the teams, they've got on reserve anywhere from $1 to $3 million for baseball, and everybody else is kind of waiting around saying, "All right, well, everyone else is kind of offering whatever's left," and so. From a resource perspective, I think Nebraska is probably in Tier 2, maybe lower Tier 2. But then, Jay Johnson, the LSU coach, said it well. He said to get to the College World Series, you got to have future major league talent, and you have to have older players that maybe aren't that, but they know what they're doing, and they can execute, and they fill in those holes, and you go from there. And I think Nebraska's figured out that you need older players. I think in the last year, and what they're doing now would reflect that they understand that. But you need more depth. You need high-end major league talent. And I mean, the fact of the matter is geography plays a part. It really does. If you're in a cold weather place like Nebraska, it's hard. The numbers, the history all shows it. It's hard to host. It's hard to build a resume that's going to impress people. It's hard to draw the very top-end talent that doesn't want to play or maybe didn't grow up in that area. So I think it's, a lot of it's just recruiting still. And maybe that's oversimplifying it, but it's keeping your talent in state, right? I mean, I've heard from a lot of people locally that point out that some of Nebraska's best talent in recent years is going to the SEC. And so you got to retain that talent. But I think it's sort of a similar situation or discussion that we have with football where all the support stuff tends to be there. It's the development piece. It's the depth piece. And in some instances now it's become the NIL piece.
Yeah, I think on the football side of it, Kansas State's doing it. They're pretty good. Michigan's doing it. Penn State's doing it. Nebraska can do it. I don't really think they'll be fine if they get the right coach. I think it comes down to coaching.
Yeah, agreed.
In baseball, I think you're right. It's very challenging. But Tier 2 is probably where they belong, right? Like based on... One of the problems is that Creighton's not really in Tier 3 anymore. I mean, they haven't made an NCAA tournament in a while.
2019, yeah.
Wichita State's really not in Tier 3, or they are.
No, they're not.
I mean, the league switch didn't help them. It's hurt them. They're playing better teams now and losing to those teams. Now, some of those teams are going to leave to go to the Big 12. Houston's leaving. UCF is leaving. I don't know if Cincinnati has a good baseball team or not, but
They're right.
Some of those teams are leaving now. I assume some of them are pretty good. I think Central Florida's pretty good, right?
Yeah, they
they're
tend to
good.
be pretty good.
So, the teams around here, the peers, aren't very good. Colorado doesn't play baseball. I don't know if Colorado State or Wyoming do. I'm not sure.
I don't believe so, no.
South Dakota State's not going to help you. South Dakota's not helping you. Maybe they need to have a series against Oral Roberts. Oral Roberts would probably do that.
They've had some midweeks with them over the years.
Yeah. So Oral Roberts might be a school, but they don't, it's hard, I think, for them to draw the kind of midweek series that will help them. And until USC and UCLA are in the league, you just can't really count on those 6 games helping you out. And UCLA will help out your RPI. It will. I mean, they're good enough, and they will play some teams in their non-conference that help you. And some of the teams out there, they'll still probably play Stanford for a 3-game series, or they'll play Arizona State, or they'll do whatever they need to do. But Nebraska's got to find a way. And I don't know if that means staging a tournament down in the South the way that Erstad used to, or hosting an event with a bunch of teams like Minnesota did, but doing it in the South.
Well, they're jumping into that showdown event to start the year next February. I mean, they may not get a practice outside before they're going down and playing TCU and some of these top powers. So they recognize, they're probably not comfortable with doing that on the opening weekend, but you got to do it.
Sometimes you can't go out to the Johnny Quick Classic out in Fresno, California.
Sure.
Back in the 80s, that's what they would do. I don't know. That's a good answer. And now one more thing. When you talk about the players, I'm not talking about specific players. What do the really good teams have? Where are they really, really good?
They have an ace that's going to win you games Friday night. They have a depth of arms, and even teams that made the College World Series, sometimes they had 5 guys that they trusted. Mm-hmm. Maybe you had a weekend rotation and 2 guys. So even that, the standard's not that high, but you have 5 guys that you can trust, and you have guys that can hit the ball out of the ballpark. You've seen that all over too. I mean, guys that are hitting 25, 30 home runs. I think there were 6 of those at the College World Series,
which Nebraska had this year.
They did have that, which I think added to the frustration for how the season went. Was they actually did have some of that major league talent on the hitting side at least, and Emmett Olson's probably going to get drafted next month, and he's probably going to have a pro career. But they just didn't have the depth, and I think that's probably what it is. I mean, you said it earlier. LSU had future major league talent on its bench.
Yeah.
Florida, I think it was, I forget which game it was. They brought off the bench an outfield transfer from Rutgers, and he was an all Big Ten guy at Rutgers. He hadn't seen the field in a month at Florida, and he came in a pinch hit situation. I had forgotten that he even went there, and it's that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
One of the best players in the Big Ten left for Florida for a bench role, and that's just it speaks to the ridiculous depth that they've had.
For example, the last half of the College World Series, Tommy White was kind of a hero.
He was.
First half, he was not good at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he had some horrible at-bats. I covered 2 of LSU's games, both against Tennessee. They were terrible. The key is he could have multiple off nights in a row, and other guys did not.
That's right.
Then, when it counted, he was great. He had the home run to beat Wake, and then he had the home run essentially to beat Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be a legend based on those two homers. And they were great at bats. He had a lot more at bats that were not great. Dylan Cruz had some poor at bats. He had some great at bats.
Mm-hmm.
Then they got Jordan Thompson was terrible.
He was
until the second inning of the final game. And so they were carried at times by other guys.
Right.
And they were really carried by those pitchers. So they had that kid they got from an Oklahoma junior college who won him the game against Tennessee, the second game. And then they had the kid who pitched struck out 17, and he was nowhere near their best pitcher. I mean, Paul Skeens is their best pitcher.
Yeah, he was their number 2, Ty Floyd.
He was their number 2, and he was incredible, though. I mean, he wasn't 17 strikeouts great during the season, and then all of a sudden he's this. The kid that they pitched, who gave up the 2 runs to start the final game,
Thatcher Hurd.
But then after that, I mean, he shut him down for 6 innings.
Yep.
So they had pitching depth too. They just didn't have to flex it much. Then they got to the World Series and they flexed it. And to me, it was an LSU Wake Forest CWS, and they just happened to play 4-3, three times at the end. But I felt like White's home run won the CWS, the first home run, the opening night, or when they beat Wake Forest.
Yep.
Is that the best baseball game you've seen there?
Yeah. Yes, probably. The Arkansas-Oregon State Game 2 final in 2018 where they dropped the foul ball and then Oregon State rallied. That was pretty epic. But this was absolutely up there. Like, just with the high-end talent, like, these are going to be 2 of the top 5 draft picks next month. Paul Skeens is going to be a major league pitcher for years to come. And so, like, when a game has the hype, it hits the hype with the stakes, with the crowd, all of it. It was outstanding. It was a great theater, and that was, I think, the best game of it.
It's I watched that one on TV. It's one of the few I watched on TV. That was one of the best games if there's ever been in the College World Series. I think, that game 50 years ago is up there. The Warren Morris home run,
sure,
probably number one. The Creighton-Wichita State game that ended on a throw from center field, an amazing throw, heartbreaking throw. That's way up there too. But that one on the CWS feels like it's all the way back.
Yeah,
it feels like going forward, it could be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Games are fast. The power is balanced. There's no talk about moving in the fences or any of this. Like, the game's found a good balance, and maybe some of that's, again, residual effect of the draft being shortened and all these guys with extra pandemic years. But there's just a depth in college baseball right now that's a ton of fun, and I think there's an understanding in the sport that the best development generally is going to be at the college level, where 20 years ago it was get drafted, work your way through the minor league system and get better that way. I think people have realized, and schools have invested in this idea that that's going to happen at the college level. So it's really thriving.
The one thing I will say, this is the last thing I'll say about college baseball players, is they seem like they're really having fun. Like, of all the players that you interview, they're way up on the list of, I'm just a dude having a lot of fun, even when they lose. Like, college baseball seems a lot of fun. It's like they've decided it's not going to be a button-up sport anymore. LSU seemed like it was having a lot of fun.
Well, and it's not
Nick
been...
contrasted a little bit with Florida, right? Did Florida have the Yankee rule? Nobody could have facial hair? Pretty sure they did.
Maybe they did. They had fun, though. They had a lot of fun. They were taking Polaroids of each other and yucking it up, and they were having a great time.
The sport just seems more fun than it used to be.
Than it used to be? Maybe.
Like, they just seem to be having a good time.
We spend so much time around college football, and how that's in some ways overcovered and super saturated with media and all this. Like, these guys, this is their weekend when they get the attention. I mean, if you're a football player, you're getting, hammered with phone calls and from media and from coaches from sophomore year on in high school. These guys mostly go under the radar, and then they finally emerge, and they're sort of finished products or close to it at the college level, and they're so comfortable in their own skin by that point. So it's different, it's refreshing, and it is, as I wrote, it was just organic. Guys messed around and they did what they did, and I think the event was better for it, and it's more fun to watch.
Yeah, it was a well-run event. Good for them. Okay, that is our podcast for this week. For Evan, I'm Sam. That is the Pick Six Podcast. We're not going to be back next week. We're going to take the holiday week off. We'll probably be back the following week to preview Big Ten Media Days, and then we won't have another podcast probably in the end of July. We'll have one that previews Nebraska's football camp probably July 29th when we get back from Big Ten Media Days. So that's kind of the schedule. Nothing next week. Then we'll have one, I think, July 11th, and then we'll probably have another one after Big Ten Media Days somewhere around July 28th or 29th to preview Husker football camp. Can you believe it? Nebraska football camp is 1 month away. 1 month.
Shocking.
God damn. I can't wait. For Evan, I'm Sam. Thanks for listening to the Pick Six Podcast.